Hello everybody, SlimKirby here, and welcome to another Mario Party minigame ranking video. Unfortunately for those who love the classic series, we are taking a bit of a break from that because Mario Party 9 is the game that introduced the car gimmick, also known as the mechanic that many people see as driving the entire series off of a really high cliff in terms of general quality. However, I am not one to quickly dismiss the quality of Mario Party 9 personally. Sure, I do prefer the classic style, and I'm glad that the series has slowly gotten back to that in its most recent installments, but Mario Party 9 wasn't that bad of a departure from the norm if I'm being completely honest. It should have probably just taken a different name as a spin-off instead of sequentially continuing as the series' main 9th installments. However, Nintendo wasn't quite doing this just yet, and they figured that some form of continuity would likely get the game to sell more, so they stuck with the numbers on this one. Now, I'll spare you the discussion on my thoughts on the board gameplay here, as that's ultimately not what we're focusing on with this ranking video. But as far as the minigames are concerned, I gotta say, I think Mario Party 9 was actually a really nice improvement from Mario Party 8. Nintendo eased off of the motion controls for a majority of their minigames, and the ones that utilize them don't really feel that bad either, with some minor exceptions of course. We're also going back to 80 in terms of our overall numbers, so yeah, this is going to be a long one, folks. My god, I can't wait for Advance and Star Rush when I only have to rank around 50 minigames again. As far as what I'll be looking at for this video, I'll be focusing on the free-for-all minigames, the 1 vs. Rivals minigames, the Bowser Jr. minigames, the boss minigames, and the 2 extra minigames. There are technically 3 extra minigames, but I'll be taking a look at Goomba Bowling alongside its free-for-all counterpart. So, with that, let's get this list started. And as usual, if you want to give your input on my rankings, feel free to do so in the comments section below. Just remember that this is my personal opinion, and we will likely have different thoughts on certain minigames and rankings, so please respond in a kind and respectful manner. Thank you, and I hope you guys enjoy. Number 80. I think we probably have a very good indication of what's down here at the very bottom of this list based on previous videos. But before I announce the worst minigame of Mario Party 9, I will say that this game did do a slight adjustment to make luck-based minigames slightly more tolerable by not only putting them in a general free-for-all category, but also giving consolation prizes for 2nd and 3rd places respectively. This way, even if you don't completely win, you can still get something to curb a loss that you had no control over. However, luck-based games are still very lazy and bad for me, and in the case of 80th place, Bowser Jr. Breakdown, this is a high-stakes boss minigame that you really want a good placement in since the rewards are usually better and can easily determine a game's winner or set a strong pace for the second half of the board. Playing a game where the results are completely dependent on dice rolls is not a good way to do this, at least in my opinion. Every roll is pretty much a 1/3 chance to get points, and sometimes there are rolls that will cause you to lose points instead, so you really have no control over how this plays out. Also, literally the worst feeling is when you build up a nice bank combo to do damage, just for one of the other players to score 12 or 15 points, pretty much guaranteeing them the win unless you can somehow do the same. This was not a great idea for a boss minigame, and you want to know the worst part? This is not the only luck-based boss minigame either. Number 79, Peer Pressure. Bowser's Big Blast, cut from the team, you know the drill with this one. Pick a line and pray. Number 78, Whomp Stomp. Another luck-based boss minigame, although this one is technically more mind-gamey than luck-based. Still though, you shouldn't know what your opponents are doing, therefore it's easy to get screwed over in this one, without you really having much control over it. Speaking of which, it really sucks for the player that gets whomped, by the way, because they seriously lose a huge chance to get points that the other players will just shamelessly capitalize on. Number 77, Bombard King Bob-omb. Pretty much the last minigame, but I feel like it's slightly more fair and not as easy for people to pull too far ahead either. Still, luck-based boss minigame though. Number 76, Mecha Choice. Wow, they actually made a multiplayer Doors of Doom from Mario Party 4. But yeah, it's luck-based and a bit mind-gamey as well. What puts this above the rest is the fact that you can at least try to pick the same door as another player in an effort to tie and still reap first place benefits, or, you know, risk it for the first place biscuit. Number 75, Goomba Bowling. And here I didn't think they could get much worse than Star Carnival Bowling, but here we are. Goomba Bowling isn't your traditional bowling game, and while I do appreciate the unique take on it, I just don't really like the controller execution here. The goal is to knock over as many Goombas as possible in one throw, and you need to line up not only your position, but also your angle before you let go of the shell. And once you do, there's pretty much no going back. I'm not a fan of this because if you manage to screw up the timing even just a little bit, you may end up not getting very many points at all, and I feel like there is a bit of a first turn disadvantage here, meaning the other players can easily copy or at the very least get prepared for the type of timing they are looking for, and that just makes me feel kind of bleh about this game in general. In addition to the general free-for-all minigame, there is a more extensive version of this game as an extra minigame as well, but aside from giving each player more attempts and throws, I wouldn't say it makes me any more enthusiastic about this one, and it's probably one of the weakest sports minigames of the entire series. Number 74, Pit or Platter. If there's one game I really have to slam the motion controls for in this title, it's probably this one. The concept of this one is fine, and heck, I'd probably prefer this over Mario Party 8's treacherous tightrope in terms of Wiimote balancing, but still, I find it's really hard to score high in this one. That's just me though, as I don't really have the most steady hand as it is anyway. It's just really punishing if you drop the ball here, and a skilled player will quite literally run away with this one. Again, it's not the worst minigame, but it's definitely a game that I'd want to avoid if it's on the board. Number 73, Pizza Me, Mario. I miss the days of Eats a Pizza, and this game just doesn't do it for me. Your goal is to spread your toppings on each individual slice of pizza by flicking the Wiimote at the right time, so it lands on a slice you haven't touched yet. Timing this one can be a bit of a chore, because if you miss a slice and touch one you've already gotten before, nothing will happen and you have to wait for that piece to circle around again. Although not much of a problem at the start, since you'll have other slices to cover anyway, the closer you get to the end of your task, the harder it ends up being, and as your opponents keep making progress, it becomes more tense, and you'll likely be more prone to making mistakes. So, as much as I love pizza, let's just say it's not because of this minigame. Number 72, Smash Compactor. It's a very deadly game of musical chairs, where you have to move your butt over to the right panel so you can escape the deadly smasher above, before you become IHOP's newest menu item. Only one person can enter each compartment, and there is one less opening per player in each round, so this game will quite literally come down to one player remaining very, very quickly. And since you and the other players will be fighting for your survival, you can bet that it'll be a challenge trying to secure your place in one of the safe zones. I just find that it's very hard to survive in this one, especially with the other players interfering with your goal, and it really makes me wish and desire for the classic days of Booksquirm. Number 71, BOMBARD. There's not a lot to say about this one other than, You have to kick bob-ombs around in an effort to not only explode on other players, but just in general knock the bombs around, meanwhile trying to avoid the explosions yourself. This game is just a bit of a clusterfudge for me. So much going on, with kind of a clunky premise in general. Not too crazy about this one. Number 70, Whole Hogs. This is a bit of a weird one. The team of players each picks a hole to pop out of, each hole corresponding to the button or direction on the Wiimote, and the solo player has to mash that player before they go back into hiding. If any player lasts a second above ground, the team gets a point, and if the whole team gets 10 points, they win, while the single player just has to prevent that from happening. Whenever the single player strikes a player, they get stunned for a few seconds and will of course not score a point. However, with 3 players working together, I don't think this is in the one player's favor at all, especially since they have to point and click instead of press the buttons, so it just kind of feels unbalanced to me. Number 69, Player Conveyor. I want to like this game more because I like the amount of thinking that goes into it, but this is a pretty big arena to keep track of, and every second you waste thinking could be another player jumping in and figuring out the puzzle just before you. Not to mention, the positioning of the right path could end up being on the opposite side of your starting position. Also, it's not entirely uncommon to have another player get in your way while you're traversing the routes, accidentally pushing you into a different path entirely. Also, Team Rocket called, they want their conveyor floor tiles back. Number 68, Tuber Tug. Here's another weird one that's also kind of a Wiimote shaker as well. You have to hold down A and B while also shaking the Wiimote, and then also let go of A and B to pick the vegetables and add them to your basket. It just feels very weird to do, and even if you do get into the rhythm, it kind of just feels brainless. Much like all the other Wiimote shakers and button mashers that exist in the Mario Party series, so yeah, understandable why it scored so low here. Number 67, 10 to Win. Hey, a luck-based minigame that's not in last place for once. So, here's the deal. I am cutting this one some slack due to the game presentation, and the fact that second and third place get rewards as well, making this game slightly more enjoyable as a result. It's still luck-based, but I can stomach this one a bit more than the others. Besides, who doesn't love a good game show setup? Number 66, Tackle Takedown. Might be a little harsh with this one because I don't think it's that bad of a minigame, but it's just way too short for my liking. I almost wish there were multiple rounds, just so each side could get a little more used to their controls and maneuvers. Also, I feel like there is a definite advantage to the team on this one. Number 65, Block and Roll. On the exact opposite extreme, I feel like this one kind of goes on a bit too long. And trust me, that extra time limit is nice for the solo player because this game can be brutal. The problem is that it's still brutal even with the extra time, which just means this game is just long. I do like the idea though, I just feel like they could have done more with less here. Maybe shorten the time, but also the number of trips the solo player has to take. Something to that effect anyway. Just my thoughts. Number 64, Pix Fix. You better have good control over your Wiimote twisting, because this game can be a bit of a chore if you have trouble with those motions. Which is a shame, because I do like what we have here. It's just annoying when you try to stop, but the Wiimote keeps moving, forcing you to take an extra second or two to fix and readjust your selection. Also, with this being a 1 versus Rivals minigame, both sides have a different number of pieces to select to accommodate the multiple players on one side. It's probably a bit easier to play as the solo player since the pieces are bigger and more defined, but the team technically has less pieces to place per player, just with the added chaos of having too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. So it's really hard to balance a game of this nature. It's not bad, but definitely not one of my favorites in Mario Party 9. Number 63, Twist Ending. More Wiimote twisting, but I feel like this one is a bit more manageable, and each player has to do the same, so it takes out the issue of balance that the last game had. However, it's way more punishing if you overshoot your mark on this one, because if you go too far, you have to cycle around the entire circle again, which can be absolutely detrimental if you make that mistake. Also, each consecutive dial moves faster than the previous one, so you have to be a bit more decisive and careful with your movements. It's alright, but again, not a game I'm super crazy about. Number 62, Diddy's Banana Blast. It feels weird calling this a boss minigame when it's more like the coin collecting games of Mario Party Yore. This game will end incredibly fast because there's honestly just not a lot to this game. You blast out of barrels to grab bananas, and that's pretty much it. Number 61, Thwomper Room. What you see is pretty much what you get with this one. Really not a lot to say here, just avoid the thwomps and don't let the other players get in your way. That's about it. Number 60, Manner of Escape. Another luck-based minigame that does get more tolerable due to ranking rewards, but is still ultimately a luck-based minigame. Also, there is a bit of strategy you can employ in this one, not to mention you have to also pay attention to what your rivals do as well, in case they get a correct answer. So there are at least more layers than the traditional pick something and win or lose scenarios. Number 59, Double Pounder. The Bowser Jr. minigames are just kind of here in this game. There really aren't any bad ones, and a lot of them are pretty basic. This is probably the most basic though, as I don't really see how you and your partner could lose this one. Number 58, DK's Banana Bonus. Like Diddy's minigame, this is literally just a banana collecting fest, but you have a little more control in this one, which makes it better. It's pretty much the same though. Number 57, Speeding Bullets. I've warmed up this game a little over the years, but only this version, and even then it's not too high on this list either. It's a racing game that uses the Wiimote motion for movement, and your vehicle auto-accelerates to max speed, assuming you don't hit anything. So the logical goal here is just to get to the end first and trying to hit as few things as possible, which can honestly be kind of hard to do if you aren't used to motion controls. But it's honestly not much different than Mario Party 8's extra minigame Canyon Cruisers when you really think about it. And I have that decently high up, so I cut this game some slack because it's a pretty inoffensive racing game with some threshold of skill involved. Just not really my favorite racing game in general and in this title. Number 56, Card Smarts. I actually wouldn't consider this game luck-based because there is an element of strategy involved in terms of how you use your cards, and it's a pretty neat mind game when you think about it, as you try to play the highest card in 3 different rounds. Do you play all your big cards immediately to try and snag the win, or do you ease up a little to draw out the aggressive players and win when they have nothing left? It's an interesting concept, honestly. Number 55, Pair of Aces. Another incredibly average Bowser Jr. minigame. Still pretty free, but at least he does a little more to try and avoid you. Number 54, Line in the Sand. One player tries to encircle the other players by drawing lines in the sand. Pretty decent concept, although it really comes down to how efficient the solo player is with the Wiimote motion functionality, and that can be pretty hit or miss with people. Number 53, Spike and Span. The solo player tries to knock out the team by knocking a spike ball around from below to collide into the other players. I initially thought this was pretty unfair for the solo player because the spike ball is pretty slow, they fall only one at a time, and there isn't a lot of time on the clock to begin with. But you can actually run some extra interference by stunning other players and forcing them into getting spiked, which does add a few extra layers to the game. However, it's still not really that exciting for me, but it's okay, I guess. Number 52, Bumper Bubbles. I really want to like this game a lot more, but it's incredibly punishing if your bubble gets popped, because you lose all your balloons in the process, and since other players can easily gang up on you, it's not a good position to be in if you're currently in the lead with the huge hollow balloons. My advice is to not be too aggressive with this one, and try to eliminate the front runner at the end when they have no chance to come back, and you can easily take some of their spoils in the process. It's not a bad game, but losing everything is just too big of a punishment for this one, at least in my opinion. Number 51, Loggerheads. A very simple reaction-based minigame, but it's also done in a way where you can't be too trigger-happy. Otherwise, you'll hit a bomb and lose a turn as a result. It's alright. Number 50, Don't Look. Well, it took 7 games, but we finally got a bit of a spiritual sequel to Mario Party 2's Look Away. Although it's a free-for-all minigame now, and has a lot more rounds, and just a slightly different premise. The goal here is to look in a direction not indicated by the on-screen arrows. Every time you do this successfully, you get a point, and at the end, the most points wins. Honestly, I would probably have this game much higher if it wasn't for the fact that you use the Wiimote motion control to pick a direction. Sometimes a quick swing may accidentally pick the wrong direction, and no one likes when that happens. Otherwise, though, it's a fine minigame. Number 49, Mecha March. Another Bowser Jr. minigame where you and your opponent try to catch up with the little scamp by moving alternately together in your double mech machine. You move by swinging the Wiimote when it's your turn, and then at some points you and your partner must swing together to clear some of the other obstacles. Another decent test of cooperative skill, but still not the best Bowser Jr. minigame. Number 48, Pinball Fall. There's a small degree of luck to this one depending on how your ball moves, but I'm cutting it some major slack because you do have some form of control in the game when your ball does ultimately get stuck, and in my experience, reacting fast to that is usually just as important as getting the optimal path to begin with. So just pick what you think will work and stay focused on your ball and you should be, in theory, fine. Number 47, Launch Break. We have a button masher and a Wiimote shaker in just one minigame. And hey, it's at a pretty decent placement too. If I had to compare this to something, I'd probably go with Mario Party 5's triple jump. You're only mashing or shaking for a short period of time, and there is a bit of skill involved when it comes to how and when you switch your inputs, and I usually like when button mashing is divided up in that manner. I also kind of like how the game depicts who wins the game, as you can kind of tell who did the best in each individual input section before it ultimately shows who the winner is. Number 46, Hazard Hold. This reminds me of some of the old mic minigames in the GameCube era, but without the mic, of course. Here the solo player picks different hazards that will ultimately try and knock out the other players, and each of the hazards is pretty unique to how it works. The single player can also try different combinations of the hazards to try and throw them off. I'm generally not too crazy about these types of games because one side's job is so much more minimal than the other side, but I do think this game at least gets the concept right a little bit, as it feels pretty balanced and manageable on either side here. Number 45, Billistics. We're at the stage of the list where I feel like we're getting a lot of the check the boxes type of minigames. The type of games you'll see in pretty much every Mario Party game, with a new coat of paint or slightly different mechanics. Billistics is basically just Mario Party 5 shock absorbers with bullet bills instead of amps, and all you have to do is just survive until the end or until everyone else is eliminated. Moving between the bills can be a little scary, especially if another player is around or in your way, but for the most part, this game is pretty inoffensive. Just not one of my favorite iterations of this idea. Number 44, Ruins Rumble. This is a game that could probably be a bit higher, but I have it around here for two reasons. For one, you change direction by tilting the Wiimote, which I think is a bit unnecessary, and it can kind of throw you off in a perspective sense. And two, the single player has to eliminate not only the entire team of other players, but also all the dry bones AI as well, which I think is a little weird, since they're technically uncontrollable by any other player in the game. I get this was done because 1 versus rivals games can be either 1 versus 3 or 1 versus 2, depending on how many people are actually playing the game, but still, it's weird that the distinction needs to exist here when it hasn't in any other Mario Party title, and I would have just rather them balanced it in a much different way. Aside from that, this game isn't too bad, just could have been a lot better, and again, I think it should have changed the single player's objective just a little bit to account for that weird distinction. Number 43, Growing Up. A very simple reaction-based minigame. Press the button that appears, and the faster you press, the higher your vine will grow. After 8 rounds, a winner is determined, and it's really that simple. By the way, I kind of like how some of these minigames have more than the typical 3 or 5 rounds. It's kind of nice to have those extra layers of suspense, not to mention more chances to come back if you get off to a bad start. Number 42, Magma Mayhem. Okay, let's check off the box for Knockout Survival Game, this time on a tilting circular platform. Really, I don't have much to say about this game. It plays just fine, and there is nothing really wrong with it. It's just something we've seen before. A lot of times now. Number 41, Polar Extreme. It's kinda like Platform Peril, but with ice physics and penguins. It's a decent game, but not as spectacular as Platform Peril is, at least in my opinion. Also, if you fall into the water, you can continue if you jump out in time, but if anything, that kinda just makes this game a bit too easy as a result, as there's not really much of a penalty for falling off. Ultimately, this game just kind of becomes a test of seeing who is the farthest on the right side of the screen before you ultimately reach the end. Number 40, Cage Match. Another Bowser Jr. minigame, but this time you and your partner are trying to catch him on a fence. I like this game because not only is it a Super Mario World reference with the climbable fences, but it's also a little more involved than some of the other Junior minigames in a cooperative sense. Number 39, Pedal to the Paddle. Another pretty involved Junior minigame. You and your partner really have to be coordinated in this one, as you both must move your rotating platforms forward quickly by jumping in rhythm as it rotates. It can take a bit to get used to the correct timing, but once you do, this game can feel pretty good. Number 38, Tumble Temple. Another self-explanatory survival game. Just do your best to avoid the spike balls as they come tumbling down. They can be a bit unpredictable at times when they reach the bottom of the slope, but I feel the game gives you ample time to react, especially if you know what general area they're going to end up in. Number 37, Mob Sleds. I hate this game in Mario Party 9's perspective mode, but by itself, when you play this game normally, I think it's a pretty good one versus rivals game. It can be a little intimidating when all three players are in the same area, but if you can maneuver around them and get away, you have the entire board to traverse and force them to come to you, so I think it works as a general minigame concept, especially for the one versus team aspect. Number 36, Cheap Shots. We actually haven't had a boss minigame in a while, and I feel like this one is pretty decent. Of all the games where you have to go ham on the boss with constant attacks, this is probably the weakest one though. The process for attacking the Cheep can be a little extra, as you not only have to grab a shell from your other competitors, but also aim the shell properly as well, and any missed attack can be a bit of a time sink. But the game lasts a decent amount of time, so even if it takes a little longer to get on the board, you can try to capitalize on your later performance in the game. Number 35, Jigsaw Jumble. It's been a while since we've had a good Jigsaw puzzle minigame, not since Mario Party 4 anyway, and I'm glad Mario Party 9 was able to capitalize on another one after all of these years. The goal is to select the correct puzzle piece that fits into each picture and be the first person to complete all 5 puzzles. You really need to observe the details of each missing piece carefully, making sure you don't only have the right jigsaw shape, but also the details on the piece line up properly with the rest of the picture as well. And I think the game does a pretty good job of blending those details together to give this game a little bit of a challenge despite its simplicity. Not my favorite Jigsaw game in the series, but I appreciate the effort. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Pieces Game of the Year! Number 34, Piranha Patch. A very simple item collect-a-thon. Although not quite as amazing as Mario Party 5's Flower Shower, it's pretty much the same idea on paper. Your goal is to be persistent with collecting flowers, but not totally aggressive, as some of the buds can grow into piranha plants that will make you lose points. So you have to have the right balance of staying close enough to snag points away from your rivals, but not too close that you accidentally get chomped instead, which is an interesting implementation of this idea. Although, I still ultimately prefer Flower Shower. Number 33, Bumper Sparks. I've never seen Beyblade, but I assume this is what Beyblade is? I don't know. It's a pretty good Bowser Jr. minigame. Kinda reminds me of the Top Maniac stuff in Super Mario Galaxy a little bit, which is probably and most likely what this is based on. Number 32, Sand Trap. We got another Junior minigame, and I think this one is actually a pretty cool idea, albeit a little easy. You and your partner remove squares by ground-pounding switches on your individual axis, and the square where your rows line up will get dropped from the field. Your goal is to drop the square Junior is on, but as you eliminate squares, the little tyke will have less room to run and hide, so you have to find a way to trap him and then eliminate him when he can't get away. Pretty neat cooperative game, although again, it's very easy. Number 31, Bowser's Block Battle. I used to consider this to be another luck-based boss minigame, but over time, while there is a small degree of luck to this one, there are ways to mitigate it. Bowser throws a bunch of dice blocks onto the field, and you do damage based on how many dice are face up with your picture on them. Now, for a couple of seconds you can grab and re-roll some of the die to see if you can get more points, and while you ultimately have no control over what these pictures will end up being, as long as you have the mindset of just roll anything that isn't me as quickly as possible, you should still be able to get something out of this. Then, after you do damage, you have to sit through some attacks, all of which are based on some of the other bosses in the game, and then repeat the process until Bowser is defeated. It's honestly a really neat setup for a boss fight, and it's easily better than the last 2 Bowser boss minigames in the series. Doesn't quite meet the same bar as the Final Battle or Frightmare, but it's the best we've had since then, easily. Number 30, Shell Soccer. I'll admit, Mario Party Superstars definitely helped spur my enjoyment of this game more, because despite the fact that it's not a typical soccer game, I think you can still have some quick fun with this one, especially if you have someone to play this with. Get ready for non-stop shell stealing fest though, because they will happen a lot here. It's still pretty fun though, and even though I would have probably preferred an actual soccer game, this wasn't a bad compromise. Number 29, Spike Strike. A boss minigame that requires quick and decisive reflexes as you try to pick the correct attacking tools and accumulate as many points as possible. One downside is that if you are slow to react, it's easy to kind of get screwed over on this one. But if you are prone to that happening, it may not hurt to aim for a normal weapon and not the golden one, just to assure you can get some points on the board at the very least. Number 28, Chain Chomp Romp. Kind of similar to the last one, but I feel like it requires more memorization, and I feel like it's not as easy to get screwed over if you aren't as quick to the draw, because you can at least figure out some additional paths to the cannons if the one you want gets snagged first. Number 27, Deck Dry Bones. Even more memorization and quick reflexes, but this is probably the best one just due to how it builds up from the start to the finish. Gets more difficult and complicated the longer it goes on, and rewards those who can meet that bar. So, pretty solid. Number 26, Flinger Painting. This game kind of reminds me a little bit of Stamp Out from Mario Party 4, but a little more chaotic since you can cover so much of the board in one splotch of paint. Honestly, this can be a bit random at times, and success will largely depend on how your opponents act and react. But as long as you stay persistent, focus on multiple areas, and try to hinder those who seem to be covering the board well, you should do at least somewhat fine here. Number 25, Crossfire Caverns. A Bowser Jr. minigame that's a little more hands-on than some of the other ones we've seen, and the timing is a little stricter in this one, so you really have to earn your victory here. But at the same time, it's pretty cooperative, and I think it works pretty well for this minigame typing. Number 24, Bowser Pop. A pretty unique idea for a Bowser Jr. minigame that actually kind of reminds me a bit of Cashapult from Mario Party 6. I like how the first phase of the game is intended to get you used to the controls before Jr. comes out, and then once he does, you have to be quick to earn your victory. It's still a pretty easy game, but I like how it's set up mechanically. Number 23, Fungi Frenzy. A little bit of memorization, a little bit of speed, just a nice little exercise to see who can get the most points. Don't have much to say beyond that, though. Number 22, Pianta Pool. It's a neat little idea for a minigame. I do think using motion controls is a little unnecessary, though, but I don't feel like it harms the game too much. Also, some players can get really lucky with hoop placements, so the combination of those two things does bring it down a little for me. However, it's still a pretty solid minigame. Number 21, Buddy Bounce. This game kinda reminds me of a little bit of Note to Self in Mario Party 6, a game I felt that could get a bit too chaotic with everyone crowding around each other. This game I feel like controls its chaos in a much better way, with more targets to aim for, some of which appear over time, and a little bit of strategy for trying to maneuver around the other players to get a bounce to the highest balloons. Pretty neat free-for-all game, I must say. Number 20, Ballistic Beach. This always reminds me of that one minigame in Wind Waker, but a much smaller scale of it. Honestly, this game is pretty good. My one hang-up is that it ends way too quickly. I think I would have much preferred a timed version where new targets get shuffled in once each field is completed, or a version that has multiple rounds, but as it stands now, I think it works very well. Number 19, Goomba Village. These next 4 games involve a lot of paying attention, and this is probably the hardest one, just because you have to be very decisive with your choice. You have to determine which house contains the most Goombas, and the numbers for each house are all pretty similar, so the answer won't be inherently obvious. However, the houses can only be claimed by one player, so you better have a backup in mind in case someone takes your answer first. Number 18, Plunderground. This game works more like Mario Party 1's shell game, where you have a couple of options on the table, each with a different incremental of gems, and your goal is to select the chest that has the most for 3 individual rounds, while they shuffle around the field each round, as well as the number of gems in each chest. When the moles stop, claim a chest and see if you paid attention properly. Each round gets more difficult than the previous one, so you have to stay on your toes, but thankfully since there are multiple rounds, you have a buffer to catch up if you make a mistake, which is always appreciative. Number 17, Goomba Spotting. You count Goombas. That's really about it. Honestly, this game is pretty good, and I've always been a fan of Mario Party 2's Roll Call, and this is pretty much the same idea and concept, just presented in a different way. The thing I like about this game is the fact that you don't see what your opponents are thinking here, which means you only have yourself to blame if you counted incorrectly, and that's the way, I like it, Number 16, Earn It. Man, this game does have a lot of games that require you to pay attention and memorize, huh? Anyway, I like this game because it's kind of like Mario Party 4's Archaeologuess, but done with 4 players this time and given a system where the fastest to figure out the answer gets more points, which I think is a great way to measure this type of challenge. Yeah, it can encourage cheating and copying, but at that point, those players are only putting their own fate in others' hands, which is never something you should be doing in Mario Party. Number 15, Wiggler Bounce. I'm actually kind of surprised this is so close to the top 10, but hey, it's a good boss minigame. It's simple and to the point, it adds a bit of chaos with sections that give more points than others, and I feel it's not so dependent on player positioning, since the arena isn't too huge, and the Wiggler's head doesn't count for anything anyway. Not the best boss minigame, but definitely up there. Number 14, Weird Wheels. The best 1 versus Rivals game. I feel like this is easily the most balanced of all the minigames in this category, and unlike Mario Party 4's Fish and Drips, the team knows what buttons they are clicking ahead of time, instead of relying on an itchy trigger finger. I think I would still prefer to be the solo here, just so once again I don't need to rely on others, but I think it's perfectly acceptable regardless of that and what side you are on. Number 13, Blooper Barrage. You kinda just go ham on Blooper here, and honestly I think it works perfectly for that. You also have to pay attention to the urchins Blooper tries to attack you with, but all you have to do is just take a moment to blast them away, and then just go for the big squid again. It's kinda therapeutic, actually. Number 12, Socket 2 Lakitu. Another really solid boss minigame with an easy-to-understand premise that's actually kinda clever in its design as well. You need to be quick and decisive, but also strategic and accurate, so you can capitalize on getting as many points as possible here, while also trying to avoid all the spinies on the ground and the other opponents getting in your way. This was the very first boss minigame I ever played in Mario Party 9, and it left a pretty good impression on me, showing that this new type of minigame variety, not to mention just the idea of incorporating a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th place reward tier system as well, could actually work pretty well in execution. Number 11, Upward Mobility. It's Mario Party 6's What Goes Up, but with the new Super Mario Bros. Bouncy blocks, and hey, I think it works pretty well. It's nice not having to worry about moving paratroopers anyway, and I always like a good platforming challenge, so this game is always a nice selection whenever it comes up for me. Number 10. On the subject of Mario Party 6's What Goes Up, although it's a shame that Upward Mobility doesn't have a descending version, that concept is taken care of by our number 10 minigame, Chain Events, where you slide down a chain and avoid obstacles by flicking the Wiimotes. While that last point is concerning, especially after Mario Party 8's Flip the Chimp, I feel like the movement is way more responsive here, and avoiding the obstacles is not only easier, but it's also less punishing every time you do get hit, which makes this a pretty solid minigame. Also, this is kind of a fun minigame to get for the Bowser Space Last Place Wins event too, because that involves trying to hit as many obstacles as possible, which adds an interesting spin to it. Number 9. We haven't seen a puzzle game crack the top 10 since Bob-omb Breakers, and although this isn't as high as number 2 was back in Mario Party 4, I'm going to give some major props here to Mario Party 9's Castle Clearout for clocking in at number 9. It's a pretty fun puzzle game to play both in single player and versus mode, so much that I even spent an entire stream session when I was doing Mario Party 9 a few months back, where I pretty much only played this for the entire stream duration. So it has a pretty addictive quality to it. I think what I like about this game is that it has a pretty unique concept in the form of not only how the falling orbs are structured and dropped, but also in how they're cleared. You clear blocks by making 6 colored orbs touch each other, but if you manage to make a specific shape or formation with them, you clear out all of those colors from the board completely. So it's not just about dropping certain colors in certain places, but also how you drop them and disconnect the triangles. It's a really cool Mario Party puzzle game that I honestly wish was a little more popular. Number 8. The Bowser Jr. games may seem to be a bit unnecessary at times due to the fact that you can only face off against an AI, and a lot of them are pretty basic cooperative exercises. However, some of them had some neat ideas, and my vote for the best one would probably have to be Zoom Room. A game like this couldn't really work well in a traditional category because of screen peeking, but here, since you are working together with your partner to find Junior, it becomes a neat little game of hide and seek, as well as cooperation with your partner to corner the little scamp. Makes me wish this game could somehow work in a more traditional sense, but I do get the challenge of trying to find a balance for it, so it works well here for this particular category. Number 7. Clocking in at 7th place is this game's answer to the overhead top racer we've seen in a number of Mario Party games now. And for this title, we have Snogo. And honestly, I think this interpretation is a pretty solid one. The course is a very basic circle track, one that we've seen in a number of other games like this, but I like the game because it does try to be different from past examples by adding some extra features and points of interest, like a patch of snow that slows you down unless you take the dash ramp to go over it, and the Mr. Blizzards that try to freeze you for a few seconds with their snowballs. I wouldn't say this game is perfect by any means, but I love what they did with this one, and again, it's probably the most they've ever done with this type of minigame trope. From Slot Car Derby to Water World to Later Skater to Cartwheeled, there just seems to be more going on here, and I respect this game for doing that. Number 6. As we get ever closer to the peak of this minigame ranking, we need to climb into the top 5. And before we reach that area, we have Peak Precision. A very short and sweet minigame, but one that always comes to mind whenever I play this game. The goal is simple, just press each button in sequence as you climb the rock wall, and the first player to reach the top will win. It's amazing how quickly this game can go, and of all the games in Mario Party 9, this is probably the one I enjoyed doing the most when it comes to trying to set new records. It's also nice because due to the simplicity of the Wiimote, it's not too hard to get tripped up by the buttons since you only have 1, 2, A, and the D pad to worry about. I guess the only downside of this game is that it may be a bit on the simplistic side for some people, but for me, I don't think simple necessarily means bad. It just means you don't have much to explain, which is honestly probably a good thing for most Mario Party games. Number 5. Like I said before, Mario Party 9 really dialed it back on the motion controls, and I think that helped make so many more of the minigames enjoyable this time around, because they weren't just shoehorned into a random minigame, and they could be better focused in games that did utilize them. And although they probably didn't need to be used in this one, I do think Ringleader uses motion controls very effectively. This is a very simple game where you jump through rings, needing to swing the Wiimote vertically to jump out of the water, and pressing the A button to gently dive down, and then leap for higher targets. However, I don't have much to say about this one other than it feels very fluid to play, even with motion controls, and I feel like it's a pretty unique concept for a minigame as well, so it's not too surprising to see this one so high into the top 5. Number 4. Mario Party has had a tried and true history of success when it comes to rope jumping. Well, okay, maybe only one super popular minigame and a couple of others with varying levels of success. But as you guys know, I do like Hot Rope Jump, and I think it's a pretty solid staple of the series. And although I wouldn't put this next game on that same level, mainly because it's not even a game of endurance, it does involve jumping rope, just with a different process. And that minigame is Skipping Class. Your goal for this is just to press a sequence of buttons for 8 rounds, and the faster you input the buttons, the more points you get, while if you do something incorrectly, you'll not get any points whatsoever. After all the rounds, the player with the most points wins, and by extension, the rest of the placements are determined as well. This is a really fun minigame, kind of simple, almost in the same boat as Peak Precision, but it works well and can be kind of competitive too. But in the sense where you only have yourself to blame if you mess up, which I'd rather that be the case than getting cheaped out of a victory by someone else. Number 3. This next minigame is a game that I really wish would have gone on a bit longer, or at least had a couple more rounds associated with it. But starting off the top 3, we have Toad and Go Seek. This game gives you a brief cutscene where you have to follow a Toad as he hides in one of the few mushroom houses around the village, and your goal is to ultimately be the first person who finds this Toad. You really have to pay attention to the details of where he's hiding though, from the color of the house he entered, but also to the houses and landforms around it, because there may be multiple colors of the same house in the field, which may trip you up a bit. It's another minigame where focusing on those details will really help you achieve victory. And of all the solid minigames here that test that medium, I think this one definitely does it the best. Like I said, I really wish this game would have gone on longer because this easily could have been my top pick if it did. Number 2. The boss minigames had a really nice debut in this game, and although there are some ones I'm not crazy about, a majority of them I would at least consider good, if not great. And here at number 2, we definitely have a great one, but also a very unique one as well. In second place, I have given the honor to King Boo's Puzzle Attack, or as I like to call this minigame, Bejeweled. Thank you for all the applause. This game requires you to make matches on a puzzle playing field, and every time you make a match of 3, you get points and deal a bit of damage to the ghostly monarch. You deal more damage and get more points the more tiles you match at once, and the more combos you get from successive cascade matches as well. But you don't really have a lot of time to set these up, so it's more about just making do with what matches are close to your current area and capitalizing on what's available, and not the potential of what you could set up, which I think makes this a little more balanced if you just so happen to be matched with someone more adaptable to puzzle games. I think that mindset also just works better for this kind of game anyway, which is why I consider this game, along with Lakitu, Blooper, and Wigglers, to be better than the likes of Chain Chomp, Spike, and Drybones, even though their games are a little more interesting as concepts. It's just about taking down this big boss by any means necessary, and that's the way it probably should be. Although, for the record, I don't necessarily disapprove of trying something different. It's just, in this case, I think this worked better. But yeah, really cool boss minigame, and easily the game I remember most from this category when it comes to Mario Party 9. Number 1. Well, for those keeping track at home, we do have a different first place minigame this time, but our defending champion was still pretty close by, taking the second slot this time. As for my number 1 pick, I'm admittedly going back to my love of platforming for this selection, because I've landed personally on the minigame Skyjinx for my selection as best minigame in Mario Party 9. Of all the platform peril clones we've had over the years, I feel like this is the version that doesn't just match the success of the original minigame, but also decisively surpasses it. There is so much more going on in this game, from rotating platforms, both horizontally and vertically, as well as bouncy cloud platforms, and even a point where you can choose between 2 different paths, depending on what type of platforming you'd personally prefer. It quite literally feels like you're playing an auto-scrolling Mario level, but without the pressure of losing a life, because you do actually have some freebie chances to fall without penalty. Now, if you lose all your hearts, then you are out for the count, and this does get to a small issue I have here, where placements only depend on when you get to the end, and not by how many hearts you have left. So someone who plays recklessly at the beginning and loses 2 hearts, but still manages to reach the end first over the other players who don't fall at all, will still get first despite their fails, and that can be a little frustrating for those who played perfectly. However, I like to see it as a scenario where a calm and collected player will likely end up ahead at the end anyway, and have a greater control over their gameplay, while someone who made mistakes will feel pressured to make a move to salvage their position, which could open them up to more mistakes along the way. So that was probably the justification here. They probably should have just determined placements by hearts and then arrival time as the tiebreaker, but I'm not going to complain too much, because they really did a great job with this minigame. I even like playing this game in perspective mode as well, where the camera focuses on your camera from behind, making it truly feel like platforming in a 3D Mario game. It's a really classic idea, really cool presentation, and a game that honors its Mario platforming roots in the best way possible, making Skyjinx my selection for favorite minigame in Mario Party 9. Well folks, that will do it for another Mario Party minigame ranking list. We have only one more game to go before we are done with the numbered titles of the Mario Party series, but we will still have a number of games to go after we reach that milestone. We're definitely more than halfway done at this point though, so let's take solace in the fact that we've made it this far as we look forward towards the next game, Mario Party 10. Or perhaps you want to join me for some other Mario Party fun, as I've been playing Mario Party on my Twitch channel for the past 80 weeks for an event I like to call Thank God It's Mario Party Friday, where every week I play a bit of a Mario Party game with my ultimate goal getting through every single one of them while also playing and analyzing the minigames along the way in the interest of making these ranking lists. We're currently on Mario Party Star Rush, so we're nearing the end of our journey, but I'm sure I'll continue it beyond for plenty of future Mario Party goodness, so come by if you want to check out the action. So yeah, with that, I think I'm about ready to close this video up. This has been SlimKirby. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to leave your own thoughts below, and I'll see you fine folk next time. And always remember to party on. Later, guys.